My son told me not to come back on a Sunday afternoon in November. The sky was that flat gray color that November does in the Midwest, the kind of sky that makes everything look final. He was standing in his doorway, and I was standing on his porch, and he said it quietly, not with anger, which I think would have been easier, but with a tiredness that told me he had been carrying the words for a long time before he finally said them out loud. He said, "Dad, please do not come back here." And then he closed the door. And I stood on that porch for I do not know how long, a minute or 10 minutes, listening to the sound of my own breathing in the cold air. I was 81 years old, and I had finally run out of chances to be a different kind of father. I am 84 now. My son and I have spoken since then. I want you to know that before I go any further, because I need you to stay with me through this. And I do not want you to leave thinking the story ends on that porch. It does not. But the road back was the hardest thing I have ever walked. Harder than anything the world ever threw at me from the outside. Because this was something I had done entirely from the inside, with my own hands, over decades. One small failure at a time. I was not a violent man. I want to be clear about that. I never raised a hand to my son or to anyone in my family. I was not a drunk. I was not absent in the obvious way. I was physically present for most of his childhood. I was there. I was in the house. But there is a kind of absence that does not require you to leave the room. There is a way of being present that is somehow worse than being gone. Because at least if you are gone, the child can build a story about you, can fill in the blank with something tolerable. When you are there, but withholding, when you are in the room, but the warmth never comes, the child cannot build a story. They just feel the cold and spend years trying to figure out what they did to deserve it. I grew up with a father who believed that love was expressed through provision. You work, you provide. You put food on the table and shoes on feet and a roof over heads, and that is the language of love. Sentiment was weakness. Praise was spoiling. Telling your child that you were proud of them was something you did rarely and with great restraint, because too much of it would make them soft. That was the philosophy I inherited. I did not examine it. I did not question it. I simply passed it on to my son, the way you pass on an heirloom without checking if it is broken. My son's name is Daniel. He was a sensitive child, the kind of child who felt everything deeply and showed it openly, who cried when he was moved and laughed with his whole body, and came to me with his small hurts expecting to be held. And I did not know how to hold him. Not because I did not love him. I loved him with a force that I could not articulate then and can barely articulate now. But because I had no map for that kind of closeness. So instead, I corrected him. When he cried, I told him to toughen up. When he failed at something, I focused on the failure rather than the trying. When he came to me with his enthusiasms, his drawings, his stories, the things a child brings to a father, hoping for a mirror that shows them they are wonderful, I gave him critique instead of celebration, because I believed I was preparing him for a hard world, and what I was actually doing was being the hard world before the world even got the chance. I want to tell you about a neighbor of mine named Frank, who I watched do the same thing to his daughter over 20 years of living next door to him. Frank was a good man by every measure the neighborhood used. He maintained his property and helped people move furniture and showed up when you needed an extra pair of hands. He was generous with everyone except the people inside his own house. His daughter Clara was 13 when I first noticed the way she looked at him at a neighborhood gathering, standing a few feet away from him with the specific posture of a child who has learned not to expect warmth, but has not yet stopped hoping for it. Shoulders slightly forward, eyes checking him without being obvious about it, waiting for something that never quite arrived. Clara left for college at 18 and came back less and less, and then barely at all. And Frank talked about it the way men of his generation talk about things they cannot face, which is to say, he did not really talk about it. He made brief, factual statements about how she was busy and kids grow up, and that is just how it goes. He died at 74, and Clara flew in for the funeral, and I watched her at the graveside, and I thought, she is grieving two things at once. She is grieving the father he was and the father he could have been. And the second grief is heavier than the first, because you can make peace with losing someone. It is much harder to make peace with never having had them. Frank had a workshop in his garage that he spent every weekend in. Clara had asked him once, she was maybe 10 years old, if she could come in and watch him work. He said the workshop was not for children. She never asked again. When they cleaned out the house after he died, they found a small wooden jewelry box in the workshop that he had been making. Nobody knew who it was for. Clara took it home. She did not say anything about it, but I think she knew. I think she always knew he loved her. She just never felt it. And knowing something in your head and feeling it in your body are two completely different things, and a child needs to feel it. Here is what I thought I was doing all those years with Daniel. I thought I was building him. I thought toughness was a gift I was giving him. I thought my own discomfort with emotion was wisdom rather than damage. I thought the fact that I worked hard and provided well and never left covered everything else. And that thinking, that quiet, confident, completely wrong thinking, is the most dangerous kind, because it disguises itself as good parenting. It wears the costume of strength and discipline in preparation for the real world. And underneath the costume is just a man who was never taught how to love out loud and never stopped to ask himself if he should learn. I have watched this story repeat across my entire lifetime. I watched it in the generation before mine. Men who came back from the war with things inside them they could not name, and children who grew up around the silence of those unnamed things. I watched it in my own generation. The fathers who provided and protected and never once said, "I love you," and genuinely did not understand why their adult children called less and less. I am watching it now in the generation of men who are busy in a different way, who are not cold exactly, but who are distracted, whose presence is diluted by devices and demands, who are in the room but only partially, and whose children are learning the same lesson Daniel learned from me, which is that they are not quite enough to earn the full attention of the person they love most. Nothing has changed. Only the reasons for the distance are different. The wound is identical. Daniel called me 4 months after he told me not to come back. I do not know what made him call. I have never asked because I do not want to examine the gift too closely in case it breaks. He called and I answered, and neither of us spoke for a moment, and then I said something I had never said to him clearly and directly in 81 years of being his father. I said, "I know I failed you. I am not going to try to explain it or defend it. I just need you to know that I know." He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Okay, Dad. Just okay." And we talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, about his kids and the weather and a television program he was watching. And it was the best conversation I have had in my life, because it was honest underneath the ordinary, because we both knew what it had cost to get to it. We see each other now, not as much as I would like, more than I deserve. He brings my grandchildren, and I sit on the floor with them, and I am everything with them that I did not know how to be with him. And I think he watches that sometimes from across the room with a feeling I cannot quite read. I hope it is healing. I hope seeing his children receive what he needed gives him something back. I think it might. I hope it does. I am telling you this because I know there is someone listening to me right now who recognizes something in this story. Maybe you are the child in it, the one who carries the cold, who knows the specific loneliness of being loved in theory and not in practice, who learned to need less because needing more was too expensive. If that is you, I want you to hear this from someone who is on the other side of that door. Your father, your mother, whoever it was, they were not withholding because you were not enough. They were withholding because nobody ever taught them how to give it. That does not make it okay. The hurt is real, and it belongs to you, and you do not have to minimize it. But the story that says something was wrong with you, that you were too sensitive or too needy or not quite the child they wanted, that story is a lie. You were exactly enough. The problem was never you. And if you are the parent in this story, if you are reading this and feeling the particular discomfort of recognition, then I am asking you not to look away from it, not to explain it or justify it or reframe it into something more comfortable. Just look at it clearly for a minute. Think about the child who is hoping you will cross the distance. Think about what it would mean to them to hear the words out loud, not implied, not demonstrated through provision, out loud, in plain language, spoken directly into their face, so there is no room for doubt. I love you. I am proud of you. You are enough. Those are not soft words. Those are the hardest words I ever said, and the most important. Do not wait for a Sunday afternoon in November. Do not wait until you are standing on the outside of a closed door in the cold, finally understanding what it costs to never say the simple thing. The door is still open right now. I know it feels complicated. I know there is history and pride and the weight of everything that has already been said and not said. I know. But I promise you, the weight of going through the door is nothing compared to the weight of standing outside it for the rest of your life, wondering what would have happened if you had. I am 84 years old. My son called me last Tuesday just to talk. I pick up every time. Pick up the phone.